if all we do is read Isaiah with only a historical lens on, that's helpful, that's good. But there's a better way to do it, which is to read it with, understand the historical setting, but also do what Nephi said, which is liken all scriptures unto us. You look at our day, and nobody's besieging our cities, cutting us off from water. But you stop and think about the covenantal connection we have with Jesus and with God. There's some real significance today that I don't think Isaiah intended back in his day, but Nephi invited us to liken it, so we're going to liken it, which is don't do things so that you get cut off from the bread and the water. The stay and the staff of life in a covenantal relationship with God is every week, like food and water, you have to keep getting it. So you go every week to the sacrament table to reestablish and make that new covenant and restore that covenant with God. I want you to be my God, we'll be your people. We partake of the bread and the water. When does that get removed from somebody? Only when they've seriously transgressed that covenant to the point where a priesthood leader will say, let's hold off on the bread and water while we work to reestablish some understanding here of what it means to be in a covenant with Christ and with God.
It's important here that we recognize we're in a covenantal community. We are saved individually, but in the context of families and communities. And what God has asked us is to come join with that community every week and renew that covenant. And remember, we talked about this in the past, that we promise to keep the commandments. The commandments are the covenantal instructions for how we'll be loyal to God and to his people, how we'll love him and love his children. In return, we get the promise of his presence. We get the promise of his prosperity, which is his presence. And back in the time of Isaiah, and we still feel this way today, the temple was in Jerusalem. And the people saw that the temple was the house of the Lord and his presence was with them. And later when they sinned so much against God, he eventually said, I left, my presence is left, and I'm taking you guys out of Jerusalem and into captivity into Babylon. And it's a little bit like our modern day. If you sin sufficiently and are not humble enough to repent, God's presence will not be immediately available to you. Now, it's there if you turn back and return to him. But if you continue to sin, as the people in the ancient times did, and that's why we have the scriptures, is to point out, here are the consequences of keeping the commandments or not. We get his presence and his prosperity when we keep the commandments. The opposite is true when we don't.